Welcome to the Orthocast. Today our guest is Macarius. He runs a YouTube channel called Orthodox Soul, which you should definitely go check out. He is a convert to the Orthodox faith and also a musician. So thank you so much for joining us. I think it's going to be a really great conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah. So my first question for you is, what was your upbringing like? Did you ever have like an atheist phase? What were your early experiences with Christianity
Yeah, it was all over the place, man, honestly. So I did not have a Christian upbringing.
hmm
Um, the only thing I could speak to really would be a brief stint in Catholic Sunday school.
hmm
And I don't want to do a disservice to anyone there, but I always say that it was something that was more like an empty gesture
Wow.
on my part. It was really just like at the behest of my grandmother, her
Uh,
generation, just like that's what you're supposed to do or whatever. So they just put
yeah.
the kids in Catholic school. But unfortunately, I always felt, or rather, I look back in retrospect and felt like none of the context necessary to understand why we're even there was ever provided.
hmm
And
Yeah.
so on top of not having anything Christian in the household by way of teachings or instruction, nothing was even being reinforced at all. So it's more like just kind of memorizing prayers and then like maybe some brief kind of watered down for the children kind of style history, maybe a little.
Yeah.
And that's about it. I mean, I had no frame of reference for like, why are we here? Who is Jesus? Who is God? Why does any of this matter?
Yeah.
So it was all just kind of over my head, unfortunately. I guess I can look back and kind of be appreciative to some extent that there was a little bit of a framework there for me
hmm
to reference later on in the future. Along with that, my mother is from Austria, from Vienna,
Oh wow.
and it is very steeped in Roman Catholic history over there.
hmm
So I mean, that's like going back in past into the past, man.
Yeah,
It's
a long
like
time
all
ago.
the stuff is ancient, super old churches and cathedrals, really cool and beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's also over there just very spiritually dead.
hmm
A lot of Europe is just very atheistic, unfortunately. So that was a lot of my early years was just kind of it was around, but it just didn't matter. It wasn't relevant. It wasn't being presented
Yeah.
in any tangible way for me personally.
Yeah. So did you believe in God at in high school and going into college? Did you ever just like fall away from it
Yeah,
completely?
yeah, that is around, interestingly enough, where it sort of started. I
Yeah.
guess that's sort of when most people start to come online a little bit, so to
Yeah.
speak. I kind of went through the whole New Age, all the movements there,
Oh wow.
sort of, but also at the same time, it was like just sort of cherry picking which things I thought were, I don't know, fascinating,
Really?
or whatever. It wasn't anything. It's not like I was living out, Buddhist practices or anything like that. Like I had this kind of admiration for these Eastern mystic ideas, but I wasn't embracing them in a way that was pragmatic in any way in my own life.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like admiring it from a distance and sort of wanting to call it my own, but not really ever doing anything to make it that way.
Yeah.
And as I started going towards the end of high school and into college, started reading a lot of New Age literature. To name a few of the really prominent ones that stuck out in my mind and really formed me in those years were
hmm
things like The Alchemist
hmm
and the Celestine Prophecy. This kind of theme of like patterns, right? Coincidences and patterns.
hmm
And that would also be something that would serve later on to sort of uh, have some kind of structure, some kind of bridge there for me to reference back to once I started entering into the faith,
hmm
because it certainly was pattern recognition that kind of started taking me more in that direction eventually.
Yeah. Wow. So how did you get introduced to New Age spirituality? Was it like a friend or something on the internet?
It's
Uh,
funny. So I had this accident one of the times I was visiting my family in Vienna with my mom.
yeah.
We were wakeboarding, and everyone was trying to get around like the turbine thing. It pulls you, and everyone
Oh
would just
yeah.
totally biff it. Nobody could make it around that first turn. I made it, And then
Wow.
when I got to the second side, I totally bailed. And what happened was you're supposed to just come totally out of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I fell into the water, and only one foot came loose, and the other came all the way around. And the fin on the bottom smacked me right in the center of the head.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that was a whole ordeal. But anyway, later on, I ended up reading this thing online
Uh-huh.
that was talking about the Kundalini awakening, and
Mm.
that it's very much tied in with head injury. And so that grabbed my attention right away because it's sort of like fortune cookie style kind of thing, like just vague
Yeah.
enough things that I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally me, yeah.
Yeah.
But it really did hit home. It was like a number of different things that I was like, yeah, that's what's happening. So it must be I'm like
Wow.
awakening spiritually, And so I started trying to really pay attention to the coincidences because that's like how you start vibrating higher, right? And you start to ascend or however it works.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what was that like next stage? Did you just get kind of like bored with, new age spirituality, or like when did orthodoxy and Christianity come into the picture?
Yeah, it kind of just fell away. I guess lukewarm, to use a
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, because there's no return in your life. It doesn't like the law of attraction. They say it works, and then
Yeah.
but it doesn't. Like either it works always or it doesn't, right? And
Yeah.
so somewhere I think on some subconscious level, something in me recognized like this is only half true at best.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent a lot of years just kind of like wallowing in depression, honestly, man.
Yeah.
I was like looking for truth. I had become aware with like a lot of these hot button topics that we get
Mm-hmm.
censored for online these days, like Illuminati, this and that, and the central banking, and all these crazy things with the New World
Yeah.
Order. And so it kind of really started to darken my worldview, and
Mm-hmm.
this
Yeah.
philosophizing in circles wasn't getting me anywhere.
Yeah.
And so just got into like drinking a lot and all the bad stuff.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until years down the line that a buddy of mine, who was the only Christian I knew, and I thought he was super annoying whenever he would, whenever he would start like he would like look for situations to like insert scripture in there.
uh,
And God bless him, I love him now, but
yeah.
he, I kind of had like my little aha moment, like I kind of reached the end of my rope, and after a lot of years of like being very anti-religion, anti-organized religion,
Mm-hmm.
anti-Christ, definitely did not like Christianity.
Yeah.
I kind of just like humbled myself, man, and called out on the name of Jesus for the first time in my life, sincerely, like directly to him. And all these kinds of signs and coincidences I mentioned that I had noticed in the past, they became very much more real and coherent and like all crystallized. Once I accepted this wasn't just like random patterns, it was
Yeah.
actually communication. And he started telling me about, my friend started telling me about different like apologists.
Mm-hmm.
I was real into Ravi Zacharias back
Yeah.
then, and William Lane Craig, and
Mm-hmm.
all those guys. On the theological end, I'd listen to like Paul Washer and Francis Chan, and that's where I got my conviction spiritually, and over
Yeah.
here is where I got my head knowledge.
Yeah.
And I was fine, I thought, for a while. We kind of just did our non-denominational thing for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and I did have some hangups. I thought everything was very much too politically correct for my taste,
Yeah.
tiptoeing a lot of around a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
and just certain things that rubbed me wrong. But yeah, I thought it was the top of the mountain, so to speak.
Yeah. So how did you get introduced to orthodoxy from kind of being this non-denominational Christian?
So that same friend that I
Uh-huh.
mentioned, he found out about it and told
Wow.
me, and so I was like, well, he was right the last time he told me something like this. So I guess I should
Yeah.
check it out. And man, I'll tell you, like within the first month, something had spoken to me already very deeply. I
Wow.
was like, ooh, something here. One thing he had mentioned was unity. That was one of the first things I remember him ever saying. Like, how there's like endless denominations and everything's crazy. what if there just wasn't that? And I was like, well,
Yeah.
that would be great, you know? So
Yeah.
when I started, you know, just my very surface level examination of Orthodoxy, that was one of the first things that I found very impressive and endearing. Like,
Hmm.
oh, wow, they're not, you know, not that we're not without any infighting at all, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's like theologically, I've never seen anything so pure. You know, it
Hmm.
was like just everything was so incredibly precise.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. How did your friend find out about it? Was it someone else or was it the internet? Do you know?
Man, I don't even know. It
Wow.
was it probably was something on the internet, I would guess.
Yeah.
He always calls himself a recovering fundamentalist
Oh,
because
wow.
he had like, you know, he's always been real serious about the faith. And funny enough, I actually ended up being baptized before he was into the church.
Wow.
And another friend of ours, also that he told, was also baptized before him. So
Wow.
he's like standing outside of the ark, like ushering people onto the ark, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, it just once it grabbed me within that first month, I knew something real was there.
Yeah.
The first liturgy I ever attended was once again when I was in Vienna,
Hmm.
and
Oh, wow.
such in like it was just didn't understand a word of it. It was in a Russian parish, but
Yeah.
man, it was just like it was heavenly, really transcendent, totally.
Yeah.
Nothing like any of the non-denominational services or
Hmm.
anything else I'd seen, you know.
Yeah.
I was afraid to even go inside because it was like
Yeah.
so serious but also serene and peaceful. It was just something else.
Yeah. And so, were you ever scared of anything in Orthodoxy, or was it like when you started going, you're like, this is it, this is it? Or like, the icons or anything, did those scare you?
Yeah, um like I was saying, since I wasn't raised Christian, I didn't
Mhm.
have a lot of theological baggage a lot of other people
Yeah.
have coming into the
Hmm.
church, but I did have some. Brief as our stint in our non-denominational church was, there were things that I had heard in that time about the Catholic Church.
Hmm.
They worship Mary,
Yeah.
right? They do all this weird stuff. They're it's a works-based system,
Hmm.
and I did recognize similarities in Orthodoxy, and so there were certain things, venerating icons. That was a thing. I think it is just for most people,
Yeah.
at least in our culture where we're not used to that form of like we don't bow in the West, right? That's
Yeah.
not something we do. So it's just kind of foreign at the
Hmm.
very least.
Yeah. True.
If not, I was still like open to it, but I was just like, this feels strange, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I worked through those things. It took about uh, 4 years, despite that I was ready
Wow.
within the
Yeah.
first year. I was
Yeah.
pretty much ready, but
Hmm.
I really wanted my wife to be on the same page,
Yeah.
and so I tried to kind of just, all right, while I'm waiting for her to warm up to all this stuff, because she was not a Christian when we met, and I
Yeah.
like beat her over the head with scripture all the
Oh
time
no.
until she converted.
Oh
And then
no.
she had her own eureka moment eventually.
Wow.
And so I wanted to just really like go at a slow pace. And all right, during this time, I can really just work through a lot of these issues and make sure I understand things before we move forward.
Yeah. So, how was that for your wife in this process? Because it's like a big change, like you not being religious and then being Christian. And then I did the same thing with my parents. I was like super excited and you like maybe talking about it too much. And then like with Orthodoxy too, like how was that?
Yeah, it took some doing, man.
Yeah.
When I first uh, came out of the closet as a Christian to her, because I
Yeah.
had known her for about 3 months and I had converted like just before we met.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really like found myself yet, so I didn't even know how to talk about it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even know my identity anymore. Like, how do I talk? How do I act?
Yeah.
And so when I first told her, uh, it actually didn't go over well. She like got very upset and stormed out of the house and like, why don't you go find a good Christian girl then? You know, because to
Wow.
her, she thought that I was saying like, I want to have a Christ and a, you know, very like a God centered relationship is what I was trying to explain to her.
Mm-hmm.
And she perceived that as me saying that she wasn't good enough, right?
Yeah.
That I was like, I wasn't attracted to her anymore or whatever. And so I just really like spent a lot of time trying to, when I said beat her over the head with the Bible, like I was really just discussing things with her for like,
Hmm.
we would just sit and talk for hours,
Yeah.
and I would just try and answer questions and stuff. So once that was done and she had really like come into her own as a Christian and
Hmm.
found Christ on her own terms.
Yeah.
It was kind of a little bit the same thing going into Orthodoxy, because she's
Hmm.
like, "You just dragged me here, now you're going to take me over there," So
Yeah.
it took a while. She felt weird about it, like
Hmm.
I think just the way women connect in general is on a more emotional basis, and
Hmm.
so that sort of charismatic emotional appeal of the Protestant
Hmm.
services
Yeah.
was sort of like missing. Like there was just something that she didn't know how to process worship anymore, I guess.
Hmm.
And eventually she did have a moment where a service moved her to tears, and it wasn't like we were at some super special service. We were at a tiny parish. There were two chanters, one guy and one girl.
Wow.
And so it wasn't like the room was full of like heavenly voices, but um, God was doing something in her heart that day, I guess, because she felt in some way inspired that started to change her mind. And then I had one day I sort of like inceptioned her, I guess, a little. I put on a video of Saint Mary of Egypt,
Hmm.
and then I left the room and went to go drive on a delivery for work.
Yeah.
And she texted me like, "This video was amazing. I love Saint Mary." And so then
Wow.
things really started rolling after that.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, you're gonna have to send me that video so I can show people it. Uh,
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. And so, do you have any advice for people who are maybe in this situation? Because this is very common, where like maybe the husband finds out about Orthodoxy and they're like really excited, and like you don't want to just like try and debate all the time because you may like turn them off. So, like, do you have any advice besides like patience and prayer?
Yeah, those would be the two main top ones
Yeah.
because it is a tricky situation.
Hmm.
I mean, I've got an entire list of family and friends that I'm just like praying one day I can see even one person come to the truth.
Yeah.
I was truly blessed to have my wife just really humble herself the way that she did. Um, I couldn't. I mean, she really has like fit herself into my frame, and she told me years and years ago. Um, she sounds maybe a little cheesy, but she's like, "I'll follow you anywhere,"
Wow.
and she has very much lived up to that, following
Yeah.
me in a
Uh-huh.
spiritual sense into the church, because it is a really big step to take. I think that it's like that kind of thing where if I send you a certain song and I'm like, you got to check this out, this song slaps, man, and you're
Yeah.
like, ah, yeah, I'll check it out. But if you discover it on your own,
Hmm.
then like for some reason it just is the most amazing thing ever, and then you got to
Yeah.
show everybody, right?
Uh-huh.
So uh, I guess in some way, like in the same way that I kind of left that video on for her and then just left without saying a word, I
Hmm.
didn't encourage her to watch it or anything. Trying to leave breadcrumbs for people, I
Yeah.
think, in
Hmm.
little ways, even if it seems like it's not going to do anything. You never know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really good advice. Maybe next I got to get her story, get her side of what her
Yeah.
upbringing was like, and coming to Christianity. That's really great. So my next question is, what were the best resources for you like in this process besides like your local catechism class? Was it like book, or was it like YouTube channel, or like what helped you the most?
Yeah. The first two things I watched that really opened up my mind
Hmm.
were two videos. The first being the interview with Father Josiah, the Rock and Sand
Yeah.
interviews, which is also, I don't have the book here, but I would also highly recommend that
Yes.
book. And then the other was, I'm not going to remember the exact title. It might have just been like Why I Converted to Eastern Orthodoxy or something. It was by Frank Schaeffer Jr.,
Hmm.
who has unfortunately left the church and I think calls himself like an atheist who believes in God or some weird thing. But I mean, the
uh,
way that he explained things in that video, it was just very succinct, and between those two, it just really like, I was like, okay, this is really appealing to my sense of reason here. I'm hearing a lot of really good reasons why I should take this more seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And let me turn this light on. Oh, I unplugged it. Never mind.
Yep.
The first book that I ever read was On the Incarnation.
Mm-hmm.
Highly recommend that one by St. Athanasius. Um, it's something that I was curious about just as I really started to take Orthodoxy seriously. The last thing I was studying in the Protestant scheme of things was penal substitutionary atonement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what I wanted to understand was, okay, how is the mechanism of atonement different in Orthodoxy? And I heard it explained in some way, and I guess the nuance was just over my head. I was like, it seems so similar. I'm not getting it. And so I got this book that helped put it into perspective a
Yeah.
lot more. And then obviously listening to Jay Dyer,
Yeah.
explaining the Nestorian implications of the atonement, it just like the light bulb went off at that moment. I just, for
Wow.
some reason, I had never thought about it. I was like, yeah, why have I never thought to ask that question? Of course, you
Yeah.
can't have a split in the Trinity, right? So
Yeah.
that was really helpful. I would, in a lot of ways, it really depends on who you have in mind when you're making like book recommendations, like who's asking.
Mm-hmm.
Like here in the West, where the Christian culture is very predominantly Protestant, that's going to gear the way that I recommend certain books like Orthodoxy and Religion of the Future.
Yeah.
Phenomenal book. I felt like Father Seraphim Rose was reading my mind. Like what
Yeah.
a giant of the faith. I mean, he's literally calling out things back in the 60s and 70s that are now taking place. Like we're
Yeah.
seeing their fulfillment. It's just so anyone in the Protestant, sphere, I would highly recommend reading that book.
Mm-hmm.
And another one, this is one I really go to a lot when I recommend,
Mm-hmm.
is I think it's backwards, but it's Antichrist,
Mm-hmm.
The Fulfillment of Globalization by G.M. Davis.
Yeah.
And the reason I really like that one is because, in the Protestant scheme, you've got a lot of just the whole doomsday prophecy
Mm-hmm.
ethos, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of hype there, a lot of sensationalized
Mm-hmm.
prophetic claims. Every other week, there's some new internet prophet who's
Yeah.
claiming something. And when you read this book, it gives a very sober perspective, um, with the Orthodox mind, how we ought frame and look at these things. And it was just so compelling that it's not like I had to discard all the stuff that I used to think about and believe.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the context that he put it in
Yeah.
was, it wasn't so sensational. It was just like, this is how we need to be thinking about this and preparing ourselves mentally and spiritually. And for anyone that has ever, I mean, if if you've spent any time around Protestants, then you know that prophecy doomsday train can run away so easy. So
Yeah.
that's one I would highly recommend. It will really just kind of like give you a whole different lens to look through at those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it's so relevant for what's going on in the world right now, right? I mean,
Yeah.
with wars going on and people talking about bridges collapsing, conspiracy this and that, some of which may be true, some might be just kind of, who knows, speculation, but just having the right mindset goes a long way.
Definitely. Orthodoxy puts everything in its right place. Like these other worldviews may get like something right, but to put it like, what does it actually mean, like for us, and like what's the solution? Like that's what
Right.
Orthodoxy provides us.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I think those are all really good book recommendations. So my next question for you is, you do music and rap. So like, have you always been like a musical person, or when did you start, being creative in that outlet?
I was not always.
Mm-hmm.
Funny enough, back in grade school, I can remember a time when we were all, it was probably like third grade, and all the kids, we were all walking out onto the playground. And like a scene in a movie, the entire class in unison broke out into like a musical number. And so you got these
Wow.
like 8-year-olds singing that thong song by Cisco all together. And I was like, I was standing literally in the back of this group of kids that are all singing. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? Because I didn't
Yeah.
listen to the radio. I didn't really, wasn't into music.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what is this? And then fast forward, um, ended up meeting a guy in high school that introduced me into like the whole underground hip hop scene, which I just didn't even know existed.
Hmm.
And so that really broadened my horizons, and I got all into like the heavy lyricism, and it was just like, I was like, oh, this is like street poetry, bro. Yeah, this is cool.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I spent a lot of years doing that and um, playing shows and doing that whole thing, that whole
Wow.
scene in LA and Hollywood and all that. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. What kind of like underground rap were you listening to? Because like I remember in middle school I was listening to like Hobson and Eminem and all these different rappers. But Eminem's like
Yeah,
huge.
I messed with Hobson a little
Yeah.
bit towards the end of my like right before I became Christian, and then I
Yeah.
stopped listening to rap for a few years straight because I
Yeah.
just was like had to like cleanse. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, back in high school, I was listening to what like Cunning Linguists, Jedi Mind Tricks, Crooked Eye, Cannabis, Chino XL. Man, just like
Uh-huh.
Big Pun, he was a huge influence on me.
Hmm.
Yeah, just a lot of really just crazy lyricists.
Yeah. I think it's difficult with rap because it's like when rap originated, it was actually like very good. It was
Yeah,
a unique musical style, but over the past like 20 years, it's become like promoting a lot of bad things. And so was
yeah,
that kind of hard is like separating those two? Like rap doesn't need to be about all these bad things. And is that kind of your approach with like making Christian rap now?
yeah, for sure. When I first became a Christian, I literally lost my artistic voice
Wow.
because for so many years I had just like sourced this dark kind of like very sexually perverse energy. Like I just
Yeah.
wanted to say all the most explicit stuff.
Wow.
um, because I was like, this is my artist ego. I get to say whatever I want.
Yeah.
And that's like part of the story or the craft or whatever.
Yeah.
So I didn't even know how to like craft lyrics anymore. It took a while, and I had to really. It was kind of going against the grain for a while there. It was like an uphill battle.
Hmm.
But eventually, I did. I think I kind of just had to like immerse myself in the spirit of Christianity for a while and really like absorb the language and the kinds of terms we use and just all of that before I can start thinking now how do I translate this into like clever punchlines or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I think one thing a friend of mine pointed out was like he's like I feel like it's hard to do because a lot of the spirit behind rap is like it's the whole point is to be sort of like arrogant and like you're boasting about
Hmm.
your rims and how much money you have and all the women you have and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's like I don't know how to approach it from a Christian perspective.
Hmm.
And I think it really just comes down to like just cleverness of lyrics. Like if I
Yeah.
can say something super clever, like slip some kind of pun in there
Hmm.
or a play on words that lays on some kind of biblical theme or something theological or something about God, and I can craft that in some clever way, then it's not in reference to myself,
Hmm.
right? But it's still going to come across as like, oh, that was dope. Do you hear that? What did
Yeah.
you? So it's just
Yeah.
kind of about the execution.
Yeah, definitely. It's causing like a new form of creativity, maybe like a renaissance in rap, hopefully, because I feel like there's a huge need for kind of good Christian music or just good like secular music because we shouldn't just listen to like Byzantine chant all day because then you're like taking something kind of reverent and making it kind of like
Right.
you're making it ordinary. So I think
Right. Yeah.
it's really great. I've talked to lots of different, Christian musicians, and I think they all like identify this need. So it's like hopefully we can start to really do that is make some good music from like a Christian worldview.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So my last question for you is, what are your plans for the future? Do you plan to make any albums? Do you plan to just focus on your YouTube channel?
Yeah, I got randomly added into this group chat with a bunch of other Orthodox guys that are all
Hmm.
like producers or artists. And so we've been kind of like collaborating and sharing different stuff and trying to pool ideas together. So definitely gonna always work on music,
Yeah,
um,
that's
and
awesome.
always try to put stuff out. Uh, and definitely gonna try and do something more with the channel.
Hmm.
Um, the goal I have is really to just like shine a light, you
Yeah.
know. Um, I was always very cerebral prior to my repentance and very philosophically inclined, which, kind of lent itself to when I became like very heavily obsessed with apologetics later on. Once I finally accepted Christ isn't just like a fairy tale. And
Yeah.
as someone who had to really like crawl through the mud and the darkness for so long and really like claw my way to the truth, um, always with that sort of question, like if only I'd, or that point, if I'd only known sooner.
Yeah.
So that's really where I'm at. Is
Hmm.
uh, I spent a lot of years just casting pearls before swine, man. Like
Yeah.
just debating like the most militant atheists
Hmm.
online,
Yeah.
with that new convert zeal, But
Yeah.
and by debate, I mean like trying to genuinely win them over,
Yeah.
because in the Protestant mindset, being lukewarm is like directly tied in with evangelism, right? Like
Exactly. Yeah.
if you're not trying to like save people and constantly preach, like are you even saved yourself?
Yeah.
So because of the view of the gospel, I would always target atheists because in my mind they're the ones that aren't saved, right? I had no concept of like what even being in or not in the church was.
Yeah.
So my goal these days, I've really just kind of switched my focus. Um, at least with Protestants, you have people that have like accepted Christ in
Hmm.
some form, right?
Yeah.
Whether they're in some varying degree of error, it's something to work with, right? So that's really what I'm trying to do, is like just share all the info that I wish I had known sooner, and to just hopefully, bring people even an inch closer to the church, or to like leave a breadcrumb, leave them some form of church history and let them find it.
Yeah.
And just to God's glory, do whatever I can, my small part.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit on two really good points. Is in Protestant and evangelicalism, your lukewarmness is tied with how much you're talking about it, which can lead you to this guilt of you're like not constantly talking about it, and you can actually end up like annoying people and turning people off even more because you're like scared that you constantly need to talk about it. Versus like
Right.
being on fire for the Lord in Orthodoxy can lead people to lots of different lifestyles, including a life of monasticism where they're, spending their life in prayer, which is just like, that wouldn't make any sense to like a Protestant. Is like, why would this person who's very holy and on fire for the Lord, you know, just be focusing on prayer and God? And
Right.
that was a big like shift for me, and like something I'm still like going through, is that yeah, don't cast your pearl before swine. Like we should really choose who we're like talking to wisely, and obviously like pray for these militant atheists, but it's not like a logical problem. Like it's not just like we're gonna show them something and they're gonna, oh, I'm gonna be a Christian now. But like open-minded Protestants and open-minded Catholics, I think when they're shown the Orthodox position, it makes sense, especially when they go and experience the divine liturgy. And even like other faiths, like people in Islam, like people who, okay, maybe there is something to God, and people who are like seeking truth. Those are the people where we can like share our stories with, share arguments with, like if they're actually open minded. So I think that's a really great point. But
Yeah, absolutely. It really opened my mind discovering Orthodoxy about what holiness really is,
yeah,
right? We talk about it in the Protestant sphere, but in that culture, like what is it? Is it just like being nice?
yeah,
You know, I think people just have a tendency to really conflate a lot of terms and concepts
Yeah.
with what their idea of it is, which is why when you watch something like the Man of God movie,
Yeah, that's a great movie.
the way that holiness is depicted in that film versus any Protestant film you watch, it's just like night and day. You
It
know,
is.
there's in this regard, everything is just subtlety and stillness. And he's like at one point winning over this guy in the movie just by his way,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
he never wavered in like the peace that he had within him. And that was being on fire for the Lord, not standing screaming into a megaphone at people walking by, you know? It's
Yeah.
like, I mean, God bless them for thinking they're doing what they should be doing, and
Yeah.
I commend them for having, I mean, it's got to take some courage to stand in
Yeah.
front of strangers and like do all that, but there's so much that could be had that they're missing. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I want to try to get across is like take everything you have that's good, keep that, and then like there's so much more over here. Come
Yeah.
get more. You can get so
Yeah.
much more out of what you're trying to do. Sometimes by doing less, right?
Mhm.
As we've seen with so many of the saints
Yeah.
and in the scriptures with the martyrs, when people are won over to the faith just by watching someone refuse to compromise.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think that was perfectly said. I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone, definitely go check out his YouTube channel and subscribe to it. Have a great night. God bless.
All right, you too, brother.